Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Katy Hays. Katy is the New York Times best-selling author of The Cloisters. She's an art history adjunct professor and holds an MA in art history from Williams College and pursued her PhD at UC Berkeley. Having previously worked at major art institutions, including the Clark Art Institute and SFMOMA, she now lives with her husband and their dog in Olympic Valley, California. Welcome, Katy.
Thanks so much for having me, Danielle.
It's so fun to have you. So I'm super, super, super excited to talk about saltwater, which I gobbled up. I have not read The Cloisters. I'm embarrassed to say it. I can't wait to get to it. But this was wow. And I love that your dedication says that you acknowledge your family is nothing like this family, which I would also want to know because the Lingates are something else. So before we get into all the fun things, will you tell our listeners about saltwater?
Yeah, Saltwater is the story of a family who has everything and the three women who will stop at nothing to escape them. And it is a mystery thriller about a family who every year vacations on the island of Capri, despite in 1992 having witnessed a terrible accident when one of their own died on the island in what was considered an accidental death. But 30 years after that occurrence, they return to the island and the same thing happens again. And the pressure that this second death puts on the family forces all of the family secrets and all of these long buried truths to unravel and reveal in a swampy July heat on the island of Capri.
Well, I have to say, I actually just got shivers when you talk about it because it is one of those books that from just the first page, Katy, I just was like, oh my, I just dug in. It's beautifully, the prose is beautiful, but the story is so gripping and the characters are fabulously drawn. What a great read. I'm so, so excited for the world to see this. So one of the things I also always do, of course, as an author is read the acknowledgments. So this is your sophomore book, and there's quite a lot in there about, and I would love to talk about the women in the story too, carefully, because obviously I don't want to give anything away. But before I do that, I want to talk about the sophomore book because this is a real thing, and it sounded like it was a real thing for you. So tell our listeners what that
Yeah.
means and give us
This
a little insight into what that was.
So saltwater is what I call my middle child, which means that, after you have I'm not myself a mother, but after you have a first child, I've watched my friends have their second kids, and the second kids like eat glue, nobody cares. They crawl up and down the stairs, no one's worried about it. The first child is like bubble wrapped and you're super
Mhm.
worried. Saltwater is my second child, my middle child, and that I worry so much less now than I did about the cloisters. But I also found it by far the most challenging book to write because it was my first time writing a novel under the microscope that comes with your first book.
Yep.
Before, you're just kind of writing in your room for yourself, for your dog, your husband, your friends. And then suddenly you're trying to write a second novel while reading your Goodreads reviews, and your agent is like, don't do that. And your editor's like, get off Goodreads. And you're like, I can't. I need to read all these mean things people are saying about me. And I found that really, really difficult to overcome. And the funny thing is, I felt like in the moment, and I feel like now that the second novel is something that you have to get through. And once you're on the other side of it, I can report now that I'm on the other side. Everything is much easier. I feel so much more at peace with writing kind of under contract and under a microscope. And yeah, it is definitely it's my middle child.
Well, and it's also, I mean, so the thing is, a lot of people don't recognize, and I assume with the Cloisters that you weren't, you wrote that over probably a longer period of time, right? I mean, first novels and who knows what's, I mean, for me, I've got even books buried in the backyard, but the first novel you sell isn't like a 12-month process, right? I mean, you write it and then you pause, you sort of think, I'll never publish a book, at least, that's how I was, and so you sort of filed away for a while, and then you pull back out, and all of a sudden, like now they're like, okay, we'd like your next book in X number of months. And you're like, what? No, it took me like 5 years to create this book, right? So it's a totally different feeling.
Yes, and for me as a writer, I am not a plotter. I can't outline a novel at all. So I sit down and I just have a question and I start writing and I see what happens. And the problem for me too is I like to write full drafts. So I'll often write three or four 70 to 80,000 word drafts that I just throw away in the process of finding the story. And so I have such an inefficient process that doing that under deadline is really intense. But I'm lucky in that I have a very flexible day job. And so I'm able to devote time and energy to my writing when I need to, and then kind of balance it out in the wash.
Yeah. So okay, so tell us about this process because I'm not an outliner either. I actually oftentimes have the idea of the end of the story in my head, like how I think, it turns out that although it doesn't always necessarily stick to that, but that's sort of in my head. But when you're writing, so you get to the end of this, a draft, and do you feel like at that point you've been like, okay, the character, sometimes it's the character that isn't quite right, or the thing that they do isn't, or there's another, like there's a whole new character emerge. How different would you say the first draft is from the draft that I read, which was
Oh
amazing?
my gosh. Okay. So I should say, first of all, with the second novel, I started working on it after we sold the Cloisters. I sat down, I had a sense of where I was going, and I tried to make this book work for several months and couldn't and abandoned it, wrote a totally different book that I ended up not liking, and then came back to this book. And so
Right.
for me, this book, the book you're reading, is almost entirely different than the first draft.
Yeah.
And I sent my agent a really early draft of the novel about, I don't know, 6 to 8 months before we gave it to my editor. I called it the trash draft.
Yeah,
And
fair.
I asked her to read that, and almost nothing except character names have continued into this. So for me, the
Right.
novels can change enormously, or they can change very little. In the case of the third book I'm working on right now, the first draft was slightly different than what I'm working with now, but you can see the seeds of where I was going. And so for me, it's the process of just spending time with the characters, stripping the story back, seeing where I want to go. And for something like a thriller or a suspense novel, you also have this expectation that you'll be pulling off this kind of great sleight of hand, this big twist. And so for me, that in particular is something that only comes as I work through the novel. And, I never started a book knowing what the payoff is going to be.
Right. Well, and actually, I'm gonna again not be explicit, but in Saltwater there were several of those. So I think that was, and I get like, and I think as seasoned readers, obviously as writers, in addition, I don't know if when you read, but when I'm reading, I'm like, I'm trying to figure out like how she did it, who did it, how it's coming. Also, like I'm like looking at the theme and how the author sort of tied in all the, and where I'm finding things that where the seed is planted or the red herring is, and versus the actual seed of a clue. And so I kind of feel like I'm pretty good at it. You get to read the poem, so I give you I true applause for that, because that was there. There were a few of those. I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome. So did you start Saltwater? I guess so we have, like you said, there's these three women, right? There's two brothers, the brothers Marcus and Richard, and it was Richard's wife who we lost in 1992. And so you've got the daughter, Helen, and then you've got Marcus's, who's the uncle's assistant, and then Marcus's wife, or the sort of three women. And they are all, it is so, what an interesting, I mean, we do hear about these sort of poor rich kids, right, who are sort of, um, you know, uh, monitored and like, but being inside Helen's perspective gave us like such an appreciation, because she doesn't, it's not the sort of same poor rich girl story that we've already heard. It's a beautiful sort of, and there's parallels with her aunt, and also with the assistant, that they're lovely. And these men that are around them, right? These men that just, own everything and take everything for granted. Even, Helen's longtime boyfriend, Freddie, I thought was so fabulously drawn. Just like everything is easy for him, because he just takes it like, he's just graced, and, nothing, he doesn't let anything get to him. It's amazing.
First, Danielle, can I say how well you have remembered all of the characters' names in this novel? And there are a lot of characters in this novel. So I have to say, first of all, kudos to you, because that is no small thing. I feel like sometimes even my agent and my editor are like, the boyfriend guy, what's his name
Well, I
again?
did
So,
just read it. I just finished it in the last few days, because I was,
well,
but yes,
I'm very impressed.
thank you.
And I think for me too, I am really interested in looking at the concept of family from a really particular lens. I always joke that families are cults we can't leave.
Yeah,
Like we're just
yeah.
born into them and we cannot leave them. And it doesn't matter how much therapy we do, or if you like go no contact or whatever it is, that is somehow imprinted on you at a cellular level. This kind
Yeah,
of family rhetoric, the family kind of ethos, the myth making. And I was really interested in kind of family as cult structure in this novel. And so while it is, we often use the phrase rich people behaving badly, for a lot of thrillers, and I think it does touch on that. But to me, I was just so much more interested in the idea that this family is a cult, that none of these women can leave for various reasons, like all for
right.
different reasons,
Yeah.
but they are desperate to escape. And then kind of what happens when they do finally get out, what they discover about themselves, and whether or not they're actually free of that family upbringing and the imprinting at the end anyways. And so for me, excuse me, that was something I was really, really interested in with this book.
Yeah. And both, I mean, these women, except obviously not Helen, because she's the child, but the other two women are, they're involved, they're not blood. So, they have these sort of, but like you said, and even the mother, who, dies in 1992, she also had, I mean, she was also sort of, like you said, part of the cult, and struggled to get away. And you actually, what I like too is that we get a view of what it was like when Richard moved. Now you've jinxed me, because now I can't
Oh
remember
yeah, when
the
when Richard moved back to Los Angeles, you
yeah,
mean?
but now I can't remember the dead wife's name.
Oh, Sarah.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. When Sarah and Richard moved back to Los Angeles, because Richard and Marcus's dad was dying, and you get that, like, I loved listening to Sarah talk about how, of course they went. He was sick. He was probably not going to live that long, and then the time got longer, and he couldn't leave. And then there's that dynamic between the brothers, which of course there is, right? It's like you said about family. It's the older brother, younger brother, and if you have siblings, I have two brothers who are younger, and they have that relationship to one another, and then I have a sister who's younger, and we have that relationship, and there are just weird things that we just take on without even knowing sort of why they're there, that we have developed from probably parental expectations since birth, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
how we were treated, and so it's actually even the two men are in many ways stuck in this cult, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
control it, but
Yeah.
do they actually control all of it? Um and then the peripheral people, the attorney Bud, and
Right.
the family friend Stan, and the housekeeper Renata, like all of those people, who are just who surround a wealthy family, and all the people who would love to see inside, right? Because
Yeah.
we're so obsessed with what it's like to be so rich as a
Yeah, and
society.
I think that's a huge part of it too. I mean, I think in today's, I mean, we're witnessing some of the largest wealth gap since kind of the Gilded Age right now in America. And so I think
Yeah.
the fascination is even more so present to kind of
Yeah.
see how the other half lives. But to me, I also think this is, like I said earlier, we talk about the theme of rich people behaving badly, and I don't want to give too much away in the
Right.
novel, but I think that this novel is actually about questioning that entire construct and,
Right.
what wealth looks like, what it is, how it operates, whether or not it's even there.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting to me too, because I think, these days we're so driven by this kind of tech oligarch money. And I really
Right.
wanted to set up a kind of contrast in the novel too between, you know, Stan, this figure in the family's orbit who has that kind of, exited Netscape early kind of money,
Right.
right?
Right.
Versus, and then did like a VC round, an early VC round in Airbnb or whatever. But like,
Right.
I wanted to look at that as compared to some of the older
Hmm.
storied families that you might encounter. I mean, this family in particular is from California, from Los Angeles, and is built on that early oil boom that built
Hmm.
like the Dohenis and stuff like that in LA. And I wanted to see kind of how those two stacked up against each other too.
And there is, I mean, there is this sense, and then, and also Naomi, Marcus's wife comes also from money. And there's this sense, which is interesting because, she doesn't seem any more, it doesn't seem like, that it's any easier to get out of the cult for her, despite the fact that actually she had resources beforehand and she had, potentially has resources if she wants to leave. It's that whole like, it is a sort of like once you go through the gateway, everything locks behind you. And the getting out is the problem with getting out is that then people are going to talk, right? And
Yeah.
that's what we just they can't have that.
Yeah.
So, no, it's just I mean, okay, so I guess I was probably babbling earlier, but I wanted to hear, were all those people in place, like in your early draft? And how did you like, so when you sort of sit down with and you start to write, did you know you were going to be in the perspectives of the, you're really in the three of the
Yeah.
women's perspectives, not all four. You don't have Naomi doesn't have a point of view, but the other three, the dead Sarah and the other two living characters have points
So
of
when
view.
the novel first started, it was set over a wedding weekend. And originally, Helen was going to get married to Freddie and she was going to have a sister. And there were all these characters that didn't exist. And Freddie's mom was in the novel. And it was like this whole sprawling wedding weekend novel.
Yeah.
And it just did not work at all. And so I stripped the whole book back, kind of back to the studs. And I went away last winter. I live in Tahoe, as we were saying before we started recording. And so we had a pretty big winter last winter. And I do in, January, March, I like to get out for like a week or two to get some sun.
Yeah.
My husband will never leave during ski season. He's like, you'd have to pry me out with a crowbar. But I'm like,
Got
I'm
it.
going to go to the desert for a week for myself. So I was struggling to figure out how to make the book work at that point. And I finally realized I had Helen's point of view, the daughter, and I had Sarah's point of view, the mother. That's probably the oldest point of view in the novel. And I realized that I was missing a character entirely. And that's when I introduced the character of Lorna, and I felt like that finally brought the book together.
Mhm.
But for me as a writer, it's really difficult to tell what I'm missing until I'm
Yeah.
pretty far into a book. So I'm very often like writing a really polished draft of a novel, then realizing it doesn't quite work the way I want it to work. And
Yeah.
then I will completely take the entire thing apart,
Yeah.
rework it entirely, rewrite it. Maybe I'll save a couple of key pieces. And yeah, and then I will just I really love like a big reconstruction and revision. So for me, that's something I'm never afraid to do. And I think it's something that my novels benefit from because I'm always willing to dismantle the whole thing at any point.
I mean, that speaks volumes because I have had to dismantle books, and I have also, the book that's coming out next year for me was the first draft is in the trash. And it was pretty, I thought it was pretty polished, but it didn't work at all. So, but the whole idea of dismantling, which I'm on like book 16 or 17. So I feel like you get more comfortable with that, but I would never say that it's something I'm like, I'm ready to do it. Let's just take her apart again. Because then I'd be like, well, you crack it open, and how do you determine like, I guess you must really be able to get some distance between you and the book. The hard thing for me is if when I finish a draft, I can tell something's not working, but I struggle to put my finger on it. So do you have like, is it your agent? Is it friends who's helping? Or is that just, you
Oh
just
my gosh.
naturally can do
So,
it?
I mean, first of all, I think I'm able to do this because I come from an academic background. And
Yeah.
so academia, we're really, first of all, publishing seems so nice to me because people say nice things about your books and people like are gentle about your writing and everybody's so friendly. And in academia, it's not like that at all. People are so
Funny.
mean about your work. People are vicious. You always have to take things apart. You're always taking like huge amounts of feedback, having to incorporate them. So for me, I think I kind of came up as a writer in an academic sense, as a nonfiction writer, doing these really big top to bottom revisions. And so for me, it just feels really comfortable to take something apart and put it back together. As far as like how to tell when a book is working, I really trust my instincts as a writer. So
Yeah.
for me, I actually don't have a lot of readers. I'm a big, like, too many cooks in the kitchen, spoil the broth person or
Sure. Sure.
drafts. So really, it's just my agent, my editor, and my husband read, and that is it. I usually don't have anybody else read, especially not when the book is in draft form, because I find too much feedback,
Sure.
too many ideas can kind of send me off course. I prefer to just be kind of in this space where I can be really objective with myself and say, okay, if I'm reading this novel, what's working and what's not working? And I'm not always perfect with
Yep.
it. For example, there is a scene in Saltwater, and it's actually the scene that we just ran as the People excerpt yesterday. And it's the scene in Saltwater that I kept for like 6 drafts. And every draft, my editor kept telling me, this isn't working, the scene isn't working, you have to get rid of it or you have to fix it. And every draft, I just kind of kept tweaking it, kept tweaking it. My editor kept saying, it's still not working, it's still not working, still not working. And finally, really close to the end, I figured out what it was that the scene needed to be doing. And I changed it, and she was like, great, now it works. But I think
Yeah.
sometimes you
Wow.
just have to know what to hold on to and you have to know what to let go of. And I really credit a lot of my academic training with that,
Yeah.
because I think when you're constructing academic essays and when you're writing for that kind of nonfiction audience, you really, you're doing a ton of research. You have
Yeah.
so much information. And when it comes down to it, when you write an essay, you have to leave a lot of that to the side, or, you read an academic essay, it's all in the footnotes.
Right.
So
Right.
I kind of feel good about knowing when to put something in the proverbial footnotes, which in fiction get cut,
Yeah.
or when to put something on the page. And I feel like for me, I have to always trust that I'll get there, even though sometimes the process is really rough.
Yeah, but it sounds like this third book was, I mean, maybe it's a trajectory and we can just say it's just gets easier from here. I do find, of course, every book has got its own, So, but that's exciting. Okay. And so can you tell us a smidge about what you're working on or when we might see it? I hate that. It's so unfair. We're like, let's
No,
celebrate this book. And then now we're like, what's next?
it's totally fine. The next book, I don't have a really good pitch for it yet, but I will say this. It's about a couple who moves to a remote community on the California coast into a town where homes are never available for sale, and they buy a house in this community. And it turns out that perhaps they have stumbled into more than they bargained for in their kind of
Mm.
rural escapade that they're undertaking. So it's kind of gothic and dark, and I'd say it's a little bit more horror adjacent than my previous 2 novels.
So that's fun. So how do ideas come to you? I mean, do you have a stack of them or it's just like you get one and you sort of, it just sticks?
It's a great question. So sometimes the way I like to do it is I like to be thinking about what the next book is going to be while I'm writing the current book. So, for example, right now I'm writing my third book. I already have an idea for what my fourth book is going to be. I'm not thinking about it actively, I'm not taking notes on it, but it's just always there on the back burner, simmering away. And it's kind of on my mind. So, and the question of how they come to me, I honestly don't know. Every now and again, I have this freak out that I won't have an
Oh,
idea.
of course.
Inevitably,
Yeah, of
something
course.
comes
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
there when the
yeah.
time is right. This particular book, this third novel, though, I wrote a draft of the book thinking it would be something else entirely.
Mhm.
And when I wrote the book, the piece that was working was not the thing I had pitched at all to my editor and my imprint. And so I had to go back and get the new idea reapproved because it was so different from the original pitch. But I feel like it's really interesting and it's working really well. And I'm excited. It's a really, really weird little novel. I'll say that.
That's so fun. Well, I mean, it is, I finish every book or get to that point where I've done with the draft and starting to sort of think about the seed of the next book and think, that's it, I've done it. That's all. There's no more ideas. And we're not alone. I've heard that from a lot of authors. So, where it comes from is kind of magic. I love it. I love the comparison to your sort of academia. You know, obviously we mentioned Ashley Winstead because you guys actually share a pub date and you have that in common too. You know, plus a beautiful exploration of humans and prose. So I love that. It's kind of fun that you guys are out on the same day. You're twins. Your birthday, um,
Yeah, book
twin.
birthdays.
Yeah,
Yeah.
book
I have
birthdays.
to say too, I have been like lightly stalking her for years because we have a similar background. And so, like
Hmm.
Lauren Nossett, who we also know, anytime
Yes.
somebody is like a recovering academic who writes fiction, I want to kind of corner them and just be like, I know we're going to be best friends. I know you don't know me yet, but it's going to be fine. Just accept this. It's happening. We have so much in common.
Well, you
So,
guys, if you haven't already met, we will introduce you at Thriller Fest, and you guys will get along wonderfully. She's fabulous, and you guys do have there is some sort of similar brilliance, female brilliance, between you guys. So I would happily connect the female brilliance, but that is, I think, actually what a powerful thing to learn to take real because I think we're pretty sensitive. I don't think people are all that nice necessarily about books. So if they're worse in academia, I'm really glad that I avoided that completely. I don't think I could have handled it. Um, so this is wonderful. Okay, well, I know we have a tight deadline, but I do want to say again, this, you know, saltwater, Katy Hays, tell us, I know you're on Instagram, Katy. Do you have are you touring? Do you have dates? Tell us about that.
Oh, I am. So I'm going to be at Book Passage in Corte Madera
Yes.
on April 4th, and I'm going to be in Healdsburg at Copperfield Books on April 6th. I am a Northern California based writer, so I will be
Yes.
in Northern California, and I'm going to be in LA for the week of AWP doing some, which is also
Fun.
a week doing some other things, but probably no official book events that week.
Okay. Well, that's fabulous. But I know also you are on Instagram. Tell us
Yeah.
how to find you if people can stalk you there.
You can find me at Hey Katy Hays on Instagram, and that is my
Yep.
only social media. I can barely keep up on Instagram. I have a million unresponded to DMs. So yeah,
That's
it's my
fair
only
enough.
place.
That's fair enough. So she's not ignoring you. She's just busy writing that third book. Well, everybody, I cannot recommend enough Saltwater. You will absolutely gobble it up. It's got a gorgeous cover too. If you're just listening to us and not watching, you got to go check out the cover because I love this woman. Yeah, this woman in the water, the
I know.
cliffs, Capri. I love that I also read that you drove down there, of course, that your husband drove you down there to get to that to get to look at Capri, which I feel like I want to write a book about Capri now so that I can go visit too.
Yeah, my poor husband, he was such a good sport. We were all the way up in northern Italy because we're mountain people. So we were there actually doing some summer skiing. I'm a big trail runner. So my husband was like summer skiing. I was trail running. And then at the last second, I was like, I think we have to go to Capri for this book. And he drove 8 hours in summer traffic. It was us and just hundreds and thousands of Germans escaping Germany in the
Right.
summer for Italy. And he was such a good sport about it. And it was such a weird place. I'm so glad we went.
I'm sure we'll tell him, yeah, tell him it paid off because it's fabulous. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with Katy Hays. You can find her at Hey Katy Hays, which is, of course, Hey, the first Hey is Hey, just in case you're having any confusion about that. And Saltwater is her new book, and so, so fabulous. So it was great to have you join today, Katy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Danielle.
Everybody, we'll see you next time. Bye.